What if everything you thought you knew about Alaska's first people was wrong? A groundbreaking genetic study has just shattered our understanding of who really settled the last frontier. We're talking about DNA evidence that rewrites human migration history. European ancestry appearing thousands of years before Columbus, lost Polynesian voyagers, ancient Siberian lineages thought extinct for millennia. This study reveals how Alaska became humanity's secret crossroads, where East met West long before recorded history. From Viking seafarers to mysterious ghost populations, genetic time capsules have been hiding in plain sight for generations. Why Alaska's DNA holds unique secrets. Alaska stands as one of the most genetically fascinating places on Earth, and there are compelling reasons why. The state serves as the ultimate geographic bridge between continents, where Asia and North America nearly touch across the Bering Strait. This positioning made Alaska the gateway for multiple waves of human migration, spanning tens of thousands of years. The state's extreme geography created natural isolation that preserved ancient genetic signatures in ways impossible elsewhere. Mountain ranges, vast tundra, and brutal winters kept populations separated for millennia, allowing rare lineages to survive that disappeared everywhere else. Unlike the continental United States, where centuries of mixing blurred ancestral lines, Alaska's remote communities maintained genetic time capsules. Multiple migration waves crossed through Alaska at different periods, each leaving distinct DNA fingerprints. From the earliest Paleo-Indian groups to Thule culture expansions, from Russian colonial settlements to modern oil boom migrations, the state became a layered archive of human movement. The genetic bottleneck effect of small, isolated populations meant that rare genetic variants were preserved and amplified in ways that create a unique laboratory for understanding human prehistory. This combination of geographic isolation and historical complexity makes Alaska's DNA uniquely revealing about ancient human migration patterns and survival strategies that shaped the Americas. The revolutionary study, a collaboration between the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Harvard Medical School, and Indigenous community partnerships, has produced the most comprehensive genetic survey ever conducted in Alaska. This wasn't typical academic research conducted in isolation. Indigenous communities guided every aspect of the study, ensuring cultural protocols were respected and that communities maintained sovereignty over their genetic information. The scale was unprecedented. Researchers collected DNA samples from over 25,000 Alaskans, representing every region of the state, from the Arctic shores of Barrow to the temperate rainforests of Southeast Alaska. Participants included members of all major Alaska Native groups, as well as descendants of Russian colonists, gold rush miners, military personnel, and modern immigrants from around the world. The methodology broke new ground in several ways. Scientists used cutting-edge ancient DNA analysis techniques, mitochondrial sequencing to trace maternal lineages, and Y chromosome tracking for paternal heritage. They also employed computational methods to identify ghost populations, groups that left genetic signatures but no archaeological or historical record. The research team integrated genetic data with oral histories, archaeological evidence, and historical documents to create a three-dimensional picture of Alaska's human story that honors both scientific rigor and indigenous knowledge systems. If these early revelations have you hooked, smash that subscribe button because we're just getting started with the most shocking discoveries. The ancient Siberian connection that defies time. Everyone knows the textbook story. Ancestors of Native Americans crossed the Bering Bridge during the last ice age around 15,000 years ago. The genetic evidence from Alaska tells a far more complex tale that shatters this simple narrative. The study revealed not one Siberian source population, but multiple distinct groups that crossed into Alaska at different times. DNA analysis identified genetic markers from at least 7 different Siberian populations, including some from regions as far away as the Altai Mountains and Lake Baikal. These weren't all Ice Age crossings either. Some genetic signatures appeared much earlier than previously thought possible, suggesting human presence in Alaska extending back over 30,000 years. Perhaps most intriguing was the discovery of ghost population DNA, genetic material from unknown Siberian groups that left no other archaeological or historical trace. These phantom populations contributed significantly to modern Alaska native genetics, but vanished completely from the Siberian archaeological record. Their DNA survived only in Alaska, making the state a genetic refuge for extinct human lineages. The timing of these migrations also surprised researchers. Rather than a single crossing during optimal conditions, evidence suggests multiple waves during both glacial and interglacial periods. Some groups apparently crossed during harsh climatic conditions, suggesting either desperation or remarkable adaptation abilities that completely rewrite our understanding of early human migration capabilities. European DNA in pre-Columbian Alaska. Here's where the study gets truly shocking. Scandinavian genetic markers appeared in Alaska native populations, with dates suggesting arrival over 1,000 years before Columbus set foot in the Caribbean. This discovery has sent ripples through the archaeological community and challenges fundamental assumptions about pre-Columbian contact. The Viking theory offers one explanation. Norse explorers reached Greenland and briefly established settlements in Newfoundland around 1000 CE. Genetic evidence suggests some may have pushed much further west than previously imagined, potentially reaching Alaska via Arctic routes. The DNA signatures match populations from Norway and Iceland, supporting the possibility of direct Norse contact with Alaska native groups. Alternative explanations are equally fascinating. Some European genetic markers might have reached Alaska through trans-Siberian migration routes. Sami people, Europe's indigenous Arctic population, show surprising genetic connections to Alaska natives. Ancient European populations could have migrated eastward across Siberia, eventually crossing into Alaska and contributing to the genetic mix thousands of years ago. The cultural implications are staggering. If Europeans reached Alaska before Columbus reached the Caribbean, it rewrites the entire timeline of European Native American contact. Some traditional Alaska Native stories speak of encounters with pale-skinned strangers from across the ice, accounts that geneticists are now taking more seriously. This genetic evidence suggests that the history of European presence in North America is far older and more complex than any textbook currently teaches, fundamentally challenging our understanding of pre-Columbian contact patterns. The lost Polynesian voyagers. The Pacific Ocean reveals one of the study's most unexpected chapters. Genetic markers characteristic of Polynesian populations appeared in coastal Alaska native groups, suggesting contact between master navigators of the Pacific and the Arctic peoples of Alaska. Polynesian seafaring capabilities were legendary. These maritime cultures successfully colonized islands across thousands of miles of open ocean using sophisticated navigation techniques. Their outrigger canoes and navigational knowledge made them capable of voyages that seemed impossible to European explorers. The genetic evidence suggests these skills may have carried Polynesian voyagers much further north than anyone imagined. The route likely involved island hopping across the North Pacific. Genetic breadcrumbs appear in populations from the Aleutian Islands, suggesting Polynesian navigators used these stepping stones to reach mainland Alaska. The Aleutian Islands, with their rich marine resources and strategic positions, would have provided ideal waypoints for trans-Pacific voyages. Cultural parallels support the genetic evidence. Both Alaska Native and Polynesian cultures share sophisticated maritime traditions, complex oral histories, and spiritual connections to ocean resources. Some traditional Alaska Native stories describe visitors arriving from the southern waters, accounts that align remarkably well with the genetic timeline. Climate patterns during certain historical periods would have made such voyages more feasible, with warmer temperatures and different ocean currents creating favorable conditions for long-distance Pacific travel that connected these distant cultures through ancient oceanic highways. Indigenous diversity beyond imagination. The genetic analysis revealed that Alaska Native populations represent not one people, but an incredibly diverse tapestry of distinct lineages with different origins and migration histories. This diversity challenges simplistic narratives about Indigenous Alaska and reveals the true complexity of Arctic civilizations. Different tribal groups maintained remarkably distinct genetic identities across millennia, despite living in relatively close proximity. The Inupiat of the Arctic coast showed different genetic signatures from the Yupik of Western Alaska, despite both being Eskimo Aleut speakers. The Athabascan peoples of interior Alaska carried genetic markers linking them to tribes thousands of miles away in the American Southwest, including the Navajo and Apache. The Inuit populations alone showed incredible complexity. Rather than being a single group that spread across the Arctic, genetic evidence suggests multiple distinct Arctic populations with different origins and migration timelines. Some Inuit lineages connected to Greenlandic populations, others to Canadian Arctic groups, and still others appeared unique to Alaska. Preservation versus mixing created fascinating patterns across the state. Geography both isolated communities, allowing distinct genetic signatures to survive, and connected them through trade routes and intermarriage networks. River systems served as genetic highways, creating connections between otherwise isolated populations. Marriage patterns, seasonal gatherings, and trade relationships all left traces in the genetic record, revealing ancient social networks that spanned hundreds of miles and maintained sophisticated cultural exchanges while preserving distinct tribal identities. The Asian tapestry. Alaska's genetic connections extend far beyond Siberia into a broader Asian tapestry that surprised even the researchers. Unexpected genetic links appeared connecting Alaska Native populations to Mongolia, China, Japan, and even Southeast Asia, revealing ancient Pacific Rim networks that predated recorded history. Mongolian genetic markers appeared particularly strongly in interior Alaska populations, suggesting connections to the great nomadic peoples of Central Asia. These weren't recent arrivals, but ancient lineages that somehow made the journey from the steppes of Mongolia to the forests of Alaska. The timing suggests these connections occurred during periods when climatic conditions made long-distance migration more feasible. Chinese genetic signatures appeared along Alaska's coasts, possibly representing ancient maritime connections across the North Pacific. Some of these markers match populations from northern China, while others connected to southern Chinese groups, suggesting multiple routes and time periods for contact. The presence of these genetics in pre-contact populations indicates that Pacific Rim connections were far more extensive than previously understood. Perhaps most intriguing were the connections to the Ainu, the indigenous people of Japan. Ainu genetic markers appeared in several Alaska Native groups, particularly along the Aleutian chain. The Ainu themselves represent an ancient population with unique genetic characteristics, and their presence in Alaska suggests that the North Pacific was a highway for human migration and cultural exchange thousands of years before European exploration created sophisticated maritime networks connecting Pacific Rim populations. Modern Alaska's genetic revolution. The 20th century dramatically reshaped Alaska's genetics. The 1970s oil boom brought an unprecedented influx of workers globally, creating new genetic combinations. Military presence profoundly shaped modern genetics. World War II and Cold War bases introduced personnel from across the US and allied nations, establishing genetic links to diverse regions like the American South and Midwest. Contemporary immigration added Filipinos, Southeast Asian genetics, Latinos, Central South American lineages, Koreans, other Asians, and Africans. Urban versus rural genetics show stark contrasts. Anchorage acts as a major melting pot with genetic contributions from 6 continents, creating unique blends. Meanwhile, remote villages often preserve genetic signatures dating back millennia. This coexistence of ancient and ultramodern genetics makes Alaska a unique laboratory for understanding human genetic evolution and adaptation within a single state, reflecting both historical isolation and recent global connectivity. Now, what do you think explains these incredible Pacific connections? Share your theories in the comments. Genetic time capsules and historical events. Alaska's DNA serves as a biological archive of historical events, with major periods of upheaval and change, leaving distinct genetic signatures the scientists can read like chapters in a book. These genetic time capsules reveal how historical forces shape population genetics in ways that traditional historical records never captured. The Russian colonial period from 1741 to 1867 left clear genetic fingerprints across Alaska. Russian Orthodox missionaries, fur traders, and colonial administrators intermarried with Alaska Native populations, creating genetic lineages that persist today. These genetic signatures are strongest in areas of intensive Russian activity, like Kodiak Island and the Aleutian chain, but appeared throughout the state, wherever Russian influence extended. The Gold Rush era created dramatic genetic shifts. The Klondike Gold Rush and subsequent Alaska gold discoveries brought tens of thousands of prospectors, merchants, and support personnel to Alaska. Most were temporary visitors, but enough stayed to significantly alter regional genetics. Mining towns that boomed and busted left genetic traces long after the settlements disappeared. DNA evidence shows contributions from Scandinavian miners, Chinese laborers, African-American prospectors, and European immigrants seeking fortune in Alaska's gold fields. World War II represents perhaps the most dramatic genetic turning point. The military buildup brought enormous numbers of service personnel to Alaska, many encountering Alaska Native populations for the first time. The war also displaced Alaska Native communities, breaking up traditional settlement patterns and creating new genetic mixing opportunities that fundamentally altered the state's demographic composition and established patterns that continue today. The Climate Change Genetic Archive. Alaska's climate preserves a unique genetic archive dating to the Pleistocene. Ice Age survivors show genetic signatures of enduring harsh conditions. During glacial maximums, with much of Alaska iced, populations survived in small, resource-rich refugia, ice-free zones, acting as genetic sanctuaries, preserving lineages extinct elsewhere. Environmental adaptation is evident. Genes for processing high-fat diets, generating body heat, and surviving extreme cold appear at much higher frequencies than in temperate populations. Some variants are unique Arctic adaptations developed over millennia of natural selection. Sea level changes left genetic signatures showing coastal adaptation. During ice ages, levels dropped over 300 feet, exposing the continental shelf. Genetic evidence indicates populations adapted to these exposed areas, then retreated as seas rose, flooding territories. These patterns help scientists understand past human responses to climate change and predict future reactions to similar environmental shifts, mirroring Alaska's ancient climate-driven changes. What this changes about American history. These discoveries force a complete reconsideration of American history. The timeline of human arrival is revised. Genetic evidence suggests presence in Alaska over 30,000 years ago, nearly double prior estimates, indicating arrival during earlier, favorable interglacial periods. Pre-Columbian contact was far more extensive than imagined. European markers appear 1,000 years before Columbus. Polynesian DNA suggests Pacific voyages to Alaska, and broad Asian connections indicate the Americas were part of global networks, not isolated continents. Indigenous sovereignty arguments gain powerful support. Genetic proof of continuous presence for tens of thousands of years strengthens land claims and cultural rights with scientific evidence of unbroken ancient-modern continuity. Archaeologists are redirected. Genetic timelines prompt reconsideration of two old sites and inspire interdisciplinary approaches, revolutionizing historical narratives. Additionally, communities reconnecting with genetic histories are revitalizing languages and cultural practices rooted deep in time, the technology behind the discovery. The scientific breakthrough behind these discoveries represents a revolution in genetic technology that makes possible what was science fiction just decades ago. Understanding the technology helps appreciate the magnitude of what scientists accomplished and why these discoveries are happening now. Ancient DNA analysis has transformed from an impossible dream to routine laboratory procedure. Scientists can now extract genetic material from samples thousands of years old, including hair, teeth, bones, and even soil samples. Advanced purification techniques can isolate tiny amounts of human DNA from samples contaminated with bacterial and environmental genetic material. Computational power drives much of this revolution. Analyzing genetic data from 25,000 individuals requires supercomputers capable of processing billions of data points and identifying patterns invisible to human analysis. Machine learning algorithms can detect genetic signatures from extinct populations and trace migration patterns across continents and millennia. Indigenous collaboration shaped not just the ethics, but the effectiveness of the research. Community members guided scientists toward family histories and oral traditions that provided crucial context for genetic findings. Traditional knowledge helped researchers understand migration routes, seasonal patterns, and cultural practices that left genetic signatures. The ethical framework developed for this research is becoming a model for genetic research worldwide. Principles of community consent, data sovereignty, and benefit sharing ensure that research serves community interests rather than extracting knowledge for academic purposes. Participants retain control over their genetic information and can withdraw consent at any time. Preservation techniques for genetic samples are advancing rapidly. Biobanks can now store genetic material indefinitely, creating archives for future research as technology continues improving. These preserved samples will enable discoveries not yet possible with current technology, ensuring that today's research contributes to future breakthroughs. What's next? The future of Alaskan genetics. Phase 2 of the research is already underway, promising even deeper insights into Alaska's genetic mysteries. The expansion will focus on underrepresented communities and regions that couldn't be included in the initial study, filling gaps in the genetic map of Alaska. Ancient remains analysis represents the next frontier. With permission from Indigenous communities and following strict cultural protocols, researchers plan to analyze genetic material from archaeological sites across Alaska. This work could bridge the gap between modern genetic profiles and ancient populations, revealing continuity, displacement, or replacement patterns across millennia. Climate change research is becoming increasingly urgent. Scientists want to understand how genetic diversity patterns predict population resilience to ongoing environmental changes. Some genetic variants that helped populations survive past climate shifts might be crucial for adapting to current warming trends. Medical applications could transform healthcare in Alaska. Understanding population genetics helps predict disease susceptibility, drug responses, and health risks specific to Alaska populations. This personalized medicine approach could address health disparities and improve outcomes for communities with unique genetic profiles. Cultural preservation efforts are integrating genetic findings with language revitalization and traditional knowledge programs. Genetic evidence of ancient connections is motivating communities to strengthen cultural practices and maintain traditions that genetic analysis proves have deep historical roots. Comparative research will extend this model to other regions. Plans are underway for similar comprehensive genetic studies in Hawaii, the Pacific Northwest, and other areas with complex migration histories. Alaska's study is becoming a template for understanding human genetics in places shaped by multiple migration waves and environmental challenges. International collaborations are expanding the scope of research. Partnerships with Russian, Canadian, and Scandinavian researchers will help trace genetic connections across international boundaries, creating a circumpolar view of Arctic population genetics that transcends modern political divisions. Alaska's genetic story reveals humanity's incredible journey across continents and millennia. These discoveries challenge textbooks, support Indigenous rights, and show us we're more connected than imagined. This research model could transform how we understand migration worldwide. Alaska stands as humanity's genetic time capsule, preserving ancient stories and modern DNA, proving that the most remote places often hold the greatest secrets about our shared human heritage. If you're fascinated by science that rewrites history and reveals hidden human connections, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're uncovering the genetic secrets of cities and regions around the world, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we discover next.